Man's Search for Meaning. It describes Frankel's horrific journey through the Nazi concentration camps, where in the period 1942 to 1945, Frankel was moved between 4 different camps, including Auschwitz, while his parents, brother, and pregnant wife perished. Surrounded by terror, he asked, "How do you make sense of such madness?" Frankel found that many of the survivors had something to live for beyond the immediate horror. Part 1, Experiences in a Concentration Camp, isn't for the faint-hearted. For those who weren't sent to the gas chambers at the initial selection, the conditions in the camp were both physically and mentally extremely harsh. He writes about the psychological effects of being completely dehumanized, of losing even your name and becoming simply a number. Also, he discusses the effects of not being able to contact loved ones, or even know if they are still living. Frankel describes how the prisoners who created dreams and plans for the future in order to stay sane, kindled their will to live in an environment where it was very easy to give up. Frankel would imagine himself teaching his students, walking in the forest with his wife, and, using these powers of imaginary and mental and emotional resilience, he grew his influence. This section, largely autobiographical, provides unique and strong evidence for some of the principles of logotherapy summarized in Part 2. Part 2, Logotherapy in a Nutshell, provides details of Frankel's formal psychological theory he terms logotherapy. He says traditional psychotherapy looks into our past to find cures for current psychological problems. He describes the techniques used to put it into practice. The therapy deals with the search for meaning in a person's life and the lack of it in present society. His logotherapy, on the other hand, he says helps people through finding hope for the future by getting in touch with the meaning in their lives. Key principles of the book. People can choose their attitude. Human beings want to feel in control. Time after time we hear people say, "But I had no choice." Based on his experience in the death camps, Frankel maintains that there is always one final freedom. We can choose our attitude towards events. He wrote, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken. People want to find and follow their personal sense of meaning. Human beings long for a sense of purpose," said Frankel. He believed there were 3 ways to create meaning in life: A, by doing a deed or creating a work; B, by appreciating the experience of someone or something; C, by choosing our attitude towards suffering. Accordingly, Frankel summarizes the status of love and work as sources of meaning like this: a man who becomes conscious of the responsibility he bears toward a human being who affectionately waits for him or to an unfinished work, will never be able to throw away his life. He knows the why for his existence, and will be able to bear almost anyhow. However, it's with the third source of meaning that Frankel challenges us. This source is suffering. Frankel stresses that he's talking about unavoidable suffering. Suffering that is avoidable is simply masochistic. There are 2 reasons why suffering can be a source of meaning. Firstly, because our inner freedom, our spiritual freedom, as Frankel occasionally calls it, to choose the attitude we have to things is absolute, as it were. We can choose which attitude to take to suffering. Secondly, and closely related to this Stoic view, we can choose to see suffering as our task. This task of suffering, the task of bearing one's cross, enables a human being to suffer proudly. Frankel experienced this drive himself after losing the manuscript that summarized his life's work. He had sewn it into his coat lining, but lost it when transferred to Auschwitz. During the terror, he kept himself sane by spending nights reconstructing the book in his head, then on pieces of stolen paper. People find happiness as a byproduct of following their meaning. Ever more people today have the means to live, said Frankel, but no meaning to live for. He saw that people were striving to achieve happiness through self-indulgence or gathering outer things, such as possessions or status. Writing in the preface to the 1984 edition of Man's Search for Meaning, he explained, "Again and again I admonish my students both in America and Europe, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you are going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued, it must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication." Man's Search for Meaning. It describes Frank